Good. Thank you, Doug. Hey, great to see everybody. A lot of folks here I recognize from my work with MOL. It's always nice to see old friends. It occurred to me as I'm watching you all log in that any one of you would be a fine panelist for this topic. The reason I say that is we all have to deal with this issue of ethics, and in one form or another in our careers. And what we're trying to do today is to maybe get you thinking a bit deeper about some of these dimensions and how they apply to us in the workforce, and maybe generate some new ideas for approaches or communications or strategies that you can use to make things a bit smoother and a bit more ethical. Although my guess is you're all very ethical leaders in your institution. So with that, let's start with some introductions first. We have three of your peers with us today, and these are folks that you probably know quite well. And I'm going to ask them to do self-introduction so they get it right and they don't have to correct me. So Ali, if you don't mind, I'll start with you.
Sure. Glad to be here. Thank you for the invitation. It's a fantastic group. My name is Ali Eskandarian. I serve as the Dean of Stevenson University Online and the Vice Provost for Online Learning. I've been in my position for 2.5 years, roughly speaking. And I think I can move it now to Chandra.
Hi, I'm Chandra Gelati, the Associate Vice President for Innovation, Learning, and Effectiveness at Chesapeake College. I've been at Chesapeake College about 13, 14 years. One of the hats I wear is overseeing learning, online learning. I also supervise the library, academic support, testing, institutional research, and assessment. So I am excited to be here today, and thank you all for coming. And I'll turn it to Colleen.
Good morning. Thank you for coming. I agree that it's good to see a number of people here and some familiar names. I am at Anne Arundel Community College. I'm the dean of what we call the IDEA Lab, and IDEA stands for Innovation, Design, Engagement, and Accessibility. And so I supervise distance education as well as AV and instructional technology. And I have been at Anne Arundel for 25 years and in this position for about 6 years. So I'll pass it right back to Larry.
Thank you, Colleen and Chandra and Ali. It just occurred to me, why don't we get a little input from you folks? If you wouldn't mind in the chat, shoot me a word or two that you think applies to this discussion of ethics. Let's just see what the audience generates here for me to start off with. So one of the things I wanted to do was maybe set sort of the contextual background for this conversation, because there's really a couple different perspectives or lens, if you will, to start looking at this. The one is ethics as a field of study, as a practice in our life. The other would be ethics in higher education broadly, how an institutional runs. And lastly, then ethics in higher education in online learning. And one of the questions we had in a prior conversation was, are there differences? Are there things that perhaps apply to the online space that might be different than the other environments? So we're going to hopefully dig into that a little bit. I'm seeing some words come up here that are familiar. Openness, politics. Oh, that's an interesting one, Julie. Transparency. Okay. So my guess is that there are some different definitions of ethics that we might draw upon, but they're all going to have a familiar theme. We could probably wordsmith it forever, but we're framing this around ethical leadership. So the responsibility we have as a leader in our institution, whatever level that's at, to be operating in a certain way. And The ethics are often something pointed to when things go bad. We just recently had in the news a commentator at one of the networks who was relieved of his work because of some ethical violations, and the company was able to state, this is our our ethics, individual violated. It was fairly clear, well, at least in their mind, of what that meant. But for our purposes, we're looking at sort of a set of guiding principles and values that are recognized by the majority. And these are set up in order to maintain fairness and equity throughout the institution. Some of the words that get used are words like integrity, respect, we've seen this morning, trust, transparency, fairness, honesty. But it's clear that an ethical leader, being ethical in leadership, is a conscious decision. And it's something that, although we may not think about writing down a note every day around ethics, we are probably presented situations where we often have to apply the basis for decisions around an ethical framework of some sort. So how does it apply to higher ed? Well, as I mentioned, we often have standards applied. Some institutions that I'm aware of have, departments or units that are looking at the ethics of the operation and convey that in their communications. Basically, we're talking about the standards for what's considered right and wrong in the organization. And as I mentioned earlier, those are generally considered accepted by the majority. As I mentioned, there are times where we could wordsmith it, and perhaps some organizations focus more on one dimension than the other, but there's probably a cluster of words that'll continually to come up. So as I was kind of gathering some input on this, they're thinking about ethics in terms of how we live our lives every day. There are laws, of course, thou shalt do this and thou shalt not do that. And then there's this underlying concept of ethics, and that is, how does this apply in principle and in practice, and how does it guide what we refer to as the laws? So with that as a background, I'd like to go to Chandra first and ask her for kind of her thoughts on the characteristics that she applies in her work around ethical leadership. Chandra?
Thank you, Larry. Yeah, your comments got me thinking even more than I had thought about as I had jotted notes down. My first characteristic, and probably, and I juggled with this list, is at first is authenticity. If I am not authentic to myself, it's not. I can't be an ethical leader. I can't live in an environment where the ethics are incongruent with the way who I am. I have had positions in the past in my life where just the things were misaligned, and I realized that, and said, okay, this is not the job for me. Let me move to an institution where there is more of a match. So that authenticity of myself, and then authentic in the work that I do. I think that leads then to honesty, because being authentic, I'm going to be honest with folks, and then that reflects in respect for others. And if I'm not authentic, people know when you're not authentic, and then you're going to lose their respect. Even at times when you are not able to be as honest with folks as you would want to, as in you are privileged information and you can't share with others. I have come to the point where I say, I'm sorry, I can't share what I know. And my staff respects that, because they know I'm being honest with them, and I'm always going to be honest with them. And I will say even, I don't know what's going on, and they'll accept that I'm not lying, I'm being honest, that I don't know the situation.
Yeah.
I also believe in servant leadership as an ethical standard. I am not a leader to be the queen of the empire. I am here to only the queen of the Western world. And so it is to help others, not to build myself. There again, back to that authenticity and honesty. I also believe in leading by example for to show who I am and show the ethics that I hopefully I can exhibit those through example. I remember one time in my career, there were folks in my building, different school, different place, who were exhibiting a behavior that others thought shouldn't be right. And so staff came to me and said, well, why aren't you doing that? If they're getting away with it, why aren't you doing that? And my response was because it's not right, because it's not the right thing to do. So people are watching. And I think I told you the other day, Larry, I have come to be metacognitive about how I lead and how I tell my staff how I impart information, because sometimes it looks easy that I'm making a decision. So I actually lead them through the path of how I have thought about what's going on and what we're going to do next, so that it's not this has come out of nowhere. And then I believe in loyalty. So I am loyal to both my staff and I am loyal to supervisors of the institution. We are all in this for a purpose that I believe in, again, going back to my authentic self. So I don't know if that has answered your question, Larry, but those are my thoughts on characteristics.
Oh, thank you, Chandra. I really like the way you teed that up, in particular around the issue of authenticity, of being true to yourself in order to work within an institution. But it brought up a question in my mind I want to give to Ali, only for this reason. He said he's only been in his position for 2.5 years. So I'm curious, Ali, from what Chandra kind of mentioned there, how did you go about assessing the ethics of the institution that you are now in with your true self when you were moving? And I'm going to guess that this has happened for many of us throughout our careers. Was that a conscious process for you?
I had a large mortgage to pay, so I had to prioritize around that. No, actually, it's a fantastic question. I think we recently had I started an online symposium at Stevenson, and one of the topics was around diversity, equity, and inclusion, and graduates of universities. And we had a lot of people who served in the role of vice president of career services and things like that from Hopkins, from American University, and others. And one of the questions that was addressed in that was, how do we advise our students who have graduated to go to a company if they think that this culture doesn't exist there, or maybe they should go there so they can actually start the culture there? So there was a very dynamic conversation that happened there. In my particular case, I happen to know the leadership, and I did actually review a formal review of the unit that I ended up serving later on, and I think it was very obvious to me, and I even put it in writing at the time, that I found the group that I'm working with now an exceptional group in terms of all the aspects of ethical leadership that we're discussing today.
Good. Thank you.
So it was actually, in this particular case, at least, it was a conscious decision.
Sure. And Chandra, from what you commented on, I'm thinking that you are setting the, I'll say the norm. You're setting the bar there for how ethics will be applied within your unit. And my guess is that that's also reflected in your institution. So thank you for sharing that out. Colleen, I'm going to come over to you now because, I mentioned earlier the idea that we're also in this experience right now with Maryland Online. We're looking at how these concepts apply to the online environment. Is there anything unique about this space that would change how we think about the ethics? Or I'm not sure I would know how to answer that question, but I'm going to give it to you. You're on mute, Colleen.
I think there's some unique elements being in the online world that other leaders maybe don't have to face. We certainly have all of the same issues. Chandra brought up one about, dealing with that balancing act of confidentiality and being open and honest, right? So we all have to do those kinds of things. We all have those ethical challenges. But in online education, we also have like this balancing act, I think, with maintaining academic integrity and also having these engaging in educational environments. And sometimes, there's questions about who's taking the course, who's completing the assessments. These are concerns that definitely are far more increased in an online environment. We have a lot of issues, and they've come to the courts now about online proctoring practices. So, we don't want to make our students feel that we don't trust them. On the other hand, we also have to consider what's happening with changes with AI, and Chat GPT and other things out there. These are dilemmas that we wouldn't face perhaps in a different leadership scenario. I think we've noticed too, I'm looking at some of the articles and things that happen across the country at other higher ed institutions, that there's a faculty side to some of these ethical implications. We always want to support our faculty 100%, but, do we require everybody to have their camera on? Do we require all the faculty to have their camera on when they're in an online sync scenario? Were any of these things ever really written in to guidelines for faculty before? But now these are popping up in this online environment that are we limiting? Do we limit how many online courses someone can teach? Whereas before we would be pretty secure in thinking, well, somebody taught 5 courses in a semester. Are they merging classes and now teaching many when we're promising these small class sizes? So, there are a few things that we didn't think about before online distance ed became so much the norm. I think one of the things I think about too is, how are we assessing our faculty? It's a very different world in online, and there's some ethical elements to that. You can't really look at assessing them quite the same way as you did in a face-to-face world. I think digital communication by its nature lacks some of the nuances of an in-person situation. So there can be misunderstandings between people, and you become the moderator, if you will, to try to smooth over certain things. And we have to take into consideration computer abuses, computer crimes, theft of data. Are we, adopting this new disruptive technology in a responsible way? Are we handling data responsibly? Those are some ethical issues that I think are very much a part of our digital environment that, we didn't have to worry about so much without our online world.
Colleen, it reminds me, or it makes me think of the phrase, I forget what company said this 40 years ago when I got started in the field of educational computing. Technology will make your life easier, right? It's going to make everything so simple. I think what you're highlighting, and I'm wondering, I just want to check with you. would you say that the ethics, the foundation of ethics in the online space may be the same as the face-to-face or whatever, but the methods, the techniques, it has become more complex, and the online technology digital world introduces things we wouldn't even thought about before?
I think so. And I think a lot about what Audra, Chandra simply used authenticity kind of as her umbrella of a lot of her characteristics of ethical leadership. And that is so much harder to really communicate in some cases. We have our staff in many cases working at a distance. There's just something that we've lost with the convenience of online. And so it's a balancing act like anything else, but I do think that in some cases to really be that authentic self, to be that ethical leader, sometimes it is a little bit harder to communicate in this world. And we do have challenges that we certainly did not have to deal with before.
Right. So, thank you, Colleen. That was really helpful. Allie, I'm going to come over to you with this next one around the idea of the difference of ethics as a philosophy and how that implies or impacts, I should say, the establishment of the rules or the laws that we operate. How do you connect those two up in your mind?
Okay, thank you, Larry. In my mind, the framework for ethical leadership, it may be called a philosophy, but I don't think of it, as you also mentioned in your introduction, in the same sense as the ethics defined and discussed in the works of great philosophers, Aristotle, Plato, or that great ethicist Spinoza, or others. I might just call it an approach or a framework, albeit an admirable one, to leadership. And it is the essence of it, the ethical leadership, that it is for the benefit of all who are involved, not just the person who happens to be in a position of authority. And it's above that, it's for the good of the organization or the entity that that leader and her team members are serving. Translating that approach or framework into how one actually serves is an art form, in my opinion, that we call ethical leadership. And the ingredients of that art form are all the characteristics of qualities that you've already mentioned, and Chandra so eloquently responded to in your first question. Things like transparency, personal integrity, holding true to one's values, respect for others, accepting responsibility, holding others accountable, and oneself accountable. So to me, translating this approach or framework into action, again, goes back to one thing that Chandra mentioned, leading by example, living by example, all through the characteristics that we consider to be ingredients of this art form. And then why is it an art form, in my opinion, is because it's not so simple as stating these characteristics and living by them. There is an art in how you do it. Chandra mentioned the case where transparency cannot be maintained because of some other issues. You have to, privacy and other things intervene. So you have to weigh how you use these characteristics or qualities in the way that you implement them on a day-to-day basis. And so I think sometimes exhibiting something might be more harmful at the given time rather than a later time. So I think exercising this ethical leadership is a little bit more nuanced than one might think in the beginning. And so I think we all have our own ways of doing it. And we can learn by example from others and other colleagues and coworkers, we need to take notice of everybody's approach to this art form. That's I think my way of thinking about it.
Yeah, thank you, Ellie. Joseph Raffer from Frederick.
Right.
Can you you're nodding your head knowingly, and I'm wondering if you have any thoughts at this point. Something seems to be resonating with you.
Nothing remarkable. Let me rephrase. Nothing nothing Ali said was, I'm not sure exactly how to say this. I was agreeing with all of it, but not for any particular reason. So,
Okay.
but I appreciate you asking, Larry, if there was anything in particular. I just am absorbing all of this, and I appreciate the time and the expertise on the panel.
Thank you. Thanks, Joe. Appreciate that. So Chandra, this all sounds very good, right? We established these ethics and we provide leadership and examples and so forth. I'm wondering about the flip side of that. What happens when that all gets defined but then goes wrong? And let's say it's maybe I'm going to give you two examples. What happens when it goes wrong at sort of the worker bee level, right? But also then we have leaders who behave unethically, and unfortunately we see example after example of that. How do we internalize that? What do we do with that?
So I'm very much a why person. Why has this happened? Why is trying to get to the root cause of things. So in my thinking about why has this gone wrong, I probably have more questions than I have answers. So my thinking process goes along this lines is, why has it gone wrong? From whose perspective has it gone wrong? Is there a mismatch in the values? Is it a mismatch, a personal mismatch? Is it a mismatch in the team, a regional mismatch? I will say that I personally experienced a regional mismatch in my career and realized I had to leave a particular region. And at the institution, has there been some change? Is there a change of leadership that all of a sudden it's a mismatch now of what we've always been doing with what we're going to do now? A shift from a liberal arts and science focus to a workforce focus, or something of that nature. And where is the mismatch? Is it right? And from whose perspective? Mine, someone else's. And then is there a generational misalignment? As in, somebody used my team as an example. I have baby boomers, I have Gen Xers, I have millennials, I have Gen Zs. So truly, when we look at a situation, I can see a generational difference in the way that they come at something. You know, baby boomers, maybe, I'm going to be stereotypical here. Sure, I'll come in and work on Saturday, or I'll work extra hours or whatever. And Gen Z's maybe going, well, why do I need to do that? Explain that to me. And, just at different levels. So bringing in those different perspectives, is that a misalignment? Have we not laid the groundwork for how we're all getting along? Again, also at an institutional level. Not saying I can necessarily would fix this at a national level. But looking at the root cause. And then has there been a shift or a difference in the societal norms? For example, there's let's put everything on social media, and then there's I want to keep things private. So where is that balance in the ethics of let's shout it to the world and let's not shout it to the world? And then
Chandra?
yes.
Can I give you another? So,
Sure.
but another example popped into my head as you were
Sure.
speaking. Something like plagiarism,
Right.
right? The technology, as we know, has
Right.
made it very easy. Does that also have a generational, like, slicing of
Yes.
that topic?
I believe so. And that's why I also believe in that is something that needs to be stated up front in a course,
Mm,
how that use may be, how the use of something like ChatGPT can be done in a course,
yeah, yeah.
so that we've established the rules of the road,
Mhm,
as it were. Uh,
mhm.
and explaining, yes, to students what plagiarism is, finding that in some cases, things that were taught in schools are not being necessarily
Mm.
conveyed anymore. And so are we there again, I come to generational. What we are used to from
Mm.
when I was in school, is that different from when
on?
others were in school or younger people were in school? And is that how we're getting, are the societal norms changing, and then the expectations are clashing at our institutions? And so we've
Right.
got to lay, those groundworks. You just think about, I mean, just to be very broad, the back in the day, I'm going to say, if you walked in with tattoos for a job interview, I mean, the expectations were covering everything. You wouldn't come in with multiple piercings, right? Now it's accepted. We've had a shift, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So again, where's the perspective, and from whose perspective are we looking at this? I have a tendency to look at all the sides before I'm trying to make a decision in how I move
What are you
something.
doing?
Yeah.
So
Hmm.
as in, I overanalyze everything, right?
No, that's okay. That's good. That's good. That's good. No, you gave us a lot of fodder there to think through. Colleen, before I go to you with my next question, I wondered if you had any reactions to what Chandra was saying as well about the shifting, I don't know, societal norms of ethics. Is that what do you think? Does that happen? Do you see that?
Yes, I actually really was kind of nodding a lot, I'm sure, about demographics and the idea of the multiple generations. I think, one of the things I saw recently was that we have 5 generations in the workforce simultaneously right now, because some folks are working still in their 70s and so forth. So we even have the greatest, what is called the greatest generation, or the silent generation, as well as the Gen Zs, the millennials, Gen Xers, and baby boomers. And that's the first time we've ever had that many generations working at
Wow.
once. But I think in higher ed, we still do see, whether it's with our faculty and those that we work with, we still see some folks that are working, well into their later years. But we also see it with our students. I'm at a community college, so I see a huge range of ages in our students. And so our issues really do have to take into consideration these multiple generations. And one of the things that I don't know, I don't remember this word coming up so far yet, but one of the things about ethical leadership, I think, is that you want to be consistent. And working with this wide range of generations makes it more difficult to be consistent. Chandra brought up the idea, like, I can tell a baby boomer, yeah, I need somebody to come in on a Saturday, but that might meet with resistance from somebody else. Again, these are stereotypes, but we all kind of have experienced this. So I definitely see a lot of what was said. And I think the societal norms, again, they're always changing. But I think that it is a different situation. One of the things I thought of too, because I wanted to bring up the idea of COVID in a second too. But we never had to think about, at least in my experience. We really didn't have to have dress codes for people that we worked with. People just knew to dress professionally. And I don't know about the rest of you, but let's face it, it's not uncommon for me to go out, getting my groceries and seeing people in their pajamas. It's like we have a very different societal norm, I think, than we had certain years, several years ago. So we have to kind of figure out, where do we fit into this? What are we going to be comfortable with? I liked one of the things Ali said, which I think has just always been my mantra, is to lead by example. And I think sometimes the unspoken is often the easiest way to sort of set your standards a little bit, just live by example. But even that is hard sometimes in our new world, where we're not all working together in the same place. So,
though it makes me think that in this discussion of ethics, there are these core beliefs, and I'm going to give you one, a core that doesn't change generationally. Respect.
Yeah.
Respect is something that, those 5 generations in the workforce, I should not, doesn't mean I don't, but I should not change my level. So Chandra, to your example, if someone walks in with a tattoo sleeve or whatever, in my mind, I've got to work on the idea of it's none of my business, whatever, withdrawing or withholding any prejudices I might have. And that's to be applied to all generations, right? So maybe there's, in this discussion, maybe there's really these root core ideas that now how they may apply out over the generations might be a little more challenging. Colleen, which leads me to the next question I have for you, which is what does make this so difficult? Why we can espouse these beliefs and such, and we have them written down and we have them on the wall, they look terrific. But when it comes time to put them into practice, and I don't mean just for ourselves, but I also mean for the institution, because sometimes we see examples at the institutional level where you just shake your head like, what were they thinking? Whose decision was that? Why is it so hard?
I think sometimes, respect is really key to being an ethical leader. And I think sometimes folks get to a leadership role and they forget that the respect is mutual, and that it's not just earning respect, but giving respect. So I think that is something that can be lost once in a while.
Good point. It has to be a two-way exchange, right?
It absolutely has to be. I read this survey put out by Global Ethics Business in 2018, and it said employees who see evidence of proactive communication and workplace trust are 15 times more likely to think that their company measures and rewards ethical conduct. But there's a lot of people who are not experiencing that, maybe not where we work, but they come to us with a negative experience. And I think one of the things that we have to, even when we have a newer employee, maybe from our organization, but a different leader, we have to really communicate the way we lead and the ethical leadership that we expect and that we deliver, because you learn from the positives as well as the negatives. And as we become leaders, and this is something that, I think is so true, and it's common sense in a way, but we've all had a bad boss. We've all had a leader who maybe wasn't cut corners, let's say, on ethics a little bit.
Yeah.
We've got to learn, and from that example, that negative example, to not do that, to never do that. And so I do think that, that is something that we have to make sure our folks really recognize in us, that, we know what it feels like to sometimes have somebody that's not dealing with us in the best way. We're not going to do that to you. So, and I think, how you deal with, we talked about multiple generations. I think that one of the things too is working at a distance. that we have to kind of reestablish some of that. And it is harder with this new world of not always being together to get that sort of comfortable feeling with, hey, there are going to be times when I might have to come down and say, this is what we have to do, or, you know, that wasn't the right step that you took, and we need to make a correction here. But you know where I'm coming from. And so we have to really make sure that it's clear and it hasn't been lost in translation. Because as leaders, you know, sometimes the buck does stop with us. And we have to make, you know, I think decision making, you know, was mentioned. And certainly they're not always good decisions, you know, not always comfortable decisions for everybody, right? You know, especially when you have a conflict. One person might like the result and another person might not. But it's what our job is, and we have to, I think Chandra explained it very nicely. It's like they need to know why we came to that decision.
Yeah,
You know, that's part of where we're coming from here. Why did we get to that decision, and how did we get there, and move forward? And how do we move forward in a comfortable, mutually respectful way?
Yeah. Thank you. You know, just a follow-up question, and I'll throw it out to the three of you in particular. If you know, I often think about what, how do I say this? The way I treat people, the way I respond can have two dimensions. It can have one of sort of personality. I'm a nice person, or I'm not a nice person, or I'm sarcastic or not sarcastic. But that's different than being an ethic of how I apply my ethics, right? I could be a rather direct, forceful, maybe brutally honest person at times. And people say, well, he's not a very nice guy. You know, he didn't deliver that well, but always ethical. And the opposite is also true. I could be overly sweet, overly generous, overly acceptance of everyone, while engaging in behaviors that aren't ethical. Have you seen examples of that? Ellie, anything come to mind?
Yeah, yes, this is a fascinating, I think, expansion of the question that you posed to Colleen. And I think one of the things that caught my attention specifically was this idea of consistency that Colleen mentioned, because it goes to the underlying principle of fairness. So if you're not consistent, you're at some level, you're bound to violate fairness. And I think people, also going back to some of the other things mentioned here in terms of ethical behavior, the roughness of appearance, the softness, the sweetness of treatment, all of that, I think people are pretty smart. They figure out those things very quickly. But if they're coupled with this level of consistency and fairness, which to us as academics is also very important, we talk about it all the time when grading students, right? I mean, this is one of the main things that we have to be very cognizant about, is how consistently do we grade students, how fair we are in treating them. But in terms of also doing the same thing with our colleagues, I think that is one of the things that that in my dealing with people comes across very quickly. And also to reemphasize another point is that if you stay in any particular job for a long time, you're bound to have times or periods where you have to deliver bad news. And I think people understand bad news, even if it may negatively affect them and have an impact on their lives, if they know that you're coming from an ethical position, and if they know that you're explaining it and describing it to them honestly and with authenticity, I think all of that follows, and it really makes for a much better workplace, much more pleasant workplace, if these ethical principles are observed and followed.
Yeah, thank you. Colleen, follow-up thoughts?
Yeah, I think it comes down to integrity, and making sure that, it's sort of many things wrapped into one, but that authenticity and respect, you have to, you can't just talk the talk. You gotta show it, that, you have the mission and values that you represent for your organization. At the same time, you have your staff and their best interest at heart. And it is a balancing act. I think we came with that word earlier today, that there is a way to do both, but you have to demonstrate that at all times, or people lose the trust. Because just being nice isn't, it's a nice, I want to work with somebody who's nice, sure. But that alone, if it doesn't have integrity behind it, is definitely not going to mean anything to me. So, and I think our folks are all the same. That's just a natural, we can all have somebody who's trying to, sort of sell us an idea. All right. But if they don't live that, people know, like Ali said, people
Well,
know.
we even have a phrase for that. We call them snake oil salesmen, like, right? Like they're super nice and everything, and we all smile, but we feel like we're being sold a bill of goods.
Yeah.
Because of that point that you made, Colleen, about the integrity and the trust. Chandra, I want to give you a chance to respond to this one as well.
I want to tag up the fairness. And branch that into equity versus equality, because I believe in fairness and consistency, but not everyone needs the same thing. So looking at it from an equity issue rather than an equality issue, and meeting the individual at what the individual needs, rather than just have a blanket statement across the board that everybody's going to do X, or I'm going to give everybody X. Not everybody needs X. Some people need Y or A or Q. So it may be, I'm thinking right now, I'm opening up a workshop for some of my staff, and I've picked some folks and said, okay, I think you would enjoy learning this topic. Well, why not open it to everybody? Well, because it's good to 6 other people, it's going to be a punishment, not the benefit that the other 5 are going to think that this is great because it's going to be fun. And for them, it's fun. This group, it's not. So this group will do something else. So rather than saying everybody's going to do the same thing. So fairness with an equity flavor, and consistency with an equity flavor.
Yeah, thank you. Again, it's such great ideas floating around here. One thing I'd like to do, and I really want to open the floor up to our audience as well. So if you've been checking your email or looking at Facebook, I'm going to call you back here, because I'm going to call out your names here in a minute and see if I can get some response. It sounds as though for a leader, person who's responsible for the management of a unit, but also in providing guidance and such for staff, that this whole issue of ethical behavior, ethics in the workplace, is a part of how we set the culture of our group, right? And we want that culture to sort of, pervade through every dimension of it. But it sounds, I know it. I've been in that role. It's a very challenging, because you always have these nuances. You always have like an exception here, or you're trying to accommodate here. It can get very complex. And I'm going to open this question up to the whole group, but I'm going to start with our panelists. I would love to hear strategies that you have developed or considered for how you behave as an ethical leader? What do you do? Like, I'm going to give you an example. You know, you've got the big sign on the wall that says, you know, respect everybody. That's a strategy, and everyone sees it and reads it. That's one. What other techniques and methods have you come up with that keep this topic, that keep you sort of grounded in your ethical leadership? And Ellie, maybe I'll come to you, and then Colleen and to Chandra. And then I want to open it up. I want to hear if there are others out there in our audience with ideas.
Sure. So how do you actually implement some of the things you have aspired to in the workplace? And I think one strategy, for example, thinking about the philosophy of ethics and how it impacts the culture, what impact it has on the culture. It's as you in the outset you enunciated. I think it's nuanced, it's difficult, but you have to try it. For example, one example that comes to my mind is I would like to have a team that's very creative, very imaginative. I like to tap into everybody's creative ideas. I keep telling people, please give us your ideas. You know better in your work environment what works, what doesn't work, and what we should be doing next. Now, implementing that means that you have to have a culture of tolerating risk and tolerating failure. And I think this goes a little bit against the grain because we always associate great benefits with leadership, always positive results with leadership, not failure. So how do you actually convey this message that it's okay to fail as long as you don't repeat the same mistake 200 times? It's great to experiment, to come up with creative ideas. We will try them within our limits, within the limits of our capabilities and resources. But you can't let the fear of failure stop you from generating creative ideas. And I think that
always has to happen though within that same ethical framework, right? You don't go outside of that.
No, that's right. That's right. That is true. You can't engage in some unethical behavior in order to take risks. The risks and all the other creative ideas have to be confined within our ethical ecosystem that you have created. That's sort of how I think about pushing the boundaries of implementation.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Colleen, thoughts about the strategies?
I think one of the things, and we've talked about honesty and openness, but I think there also needs to be an element of, if you make a mistake, it may not have been an ethical mistake, but nonetheless, I think if you share with your people, yeah, I really goofed. I forgot to include you in this information or something along those lines. I made a decision. I jumped to a decision perhaps because I was getting pressured or whatever. And I left your thoughts out of it, or however it happens to be. I think if you're, if the people you work with understand that you make mistakes, but you accept them and you own them, that, that goes back to that whole message about integrity. And it's important. I really agreed with what Ali said, as far as, sometimes we're not gonna hit the mark. We're gonna fail. And it's okay as long as, we tried our best and we did what we thought would work. So again, you just keep modeling that ethical behavior, that integrity, to accept, everyone is going to make a mistake. Where do we go from here? But you have to, that's just good leadership, I guess, in general. But I also think it shows that you possess that integrity to accept your own mistakes and own up to them.
Yeah. Thank you. Thanks, Colleen. Chandra?
I agree wholeheartedly with what Ali and Colleen have both said. I have a phrase that I use, the fate of the free world does not rest upon what we do here today.
Mm.
So if we mess up, we go on. And it's okay to mess up. It's okay to make a mistake. And you're right, we own it and move on. So as long as we've tried and had a good faith effort with whatever it is we've done. And I also agree with, we model the behavior, and if I mess up, I mess up, and I own it, and I say to folks, hey, here's what I was thinking when I made that decision. Obviously that was wrong. So tell me what are we going to do? I early on used to hold events. We used to call it recess with my folks. Doug will remember some of this. And we did things like line dancing and played games and, red light, blue light in the quad, right? Those kinds of things, so that people learned they could make mistakes, so that when we did line dancing and everybody's going left and I'm the only one going right because I can't get my left and right together. It was okay for me to make a mistake in front of them, so they felt more comfortable making mistakes in front of me. So doing those kinds of team building activities really also sets that framework for, if you're okay to be silly and make a mistake, then it's okay for me to make a mistake in line dancing, it's okay for me to make a mistake somewhere else, or you can come to me. So what we do is important, but it doesn't have to. Again, another thing I say, we spend a lot of time at work. We don't have to be miserable while we're there. So
And something that you said, though, kind of resonated again. We've selected a couple select words today, respect being one. And what you just spoke of was really the concept to me of trust. Like you use these strategies to build unit trust, in order that when a mistake is going to happen, it might be you or whomever, you have the belief that the mistake was made, I don't know, honestly. It was a mistake without a motive or and that's so critical. Pauline used the word integrity a couple of times, I mean, it's so critical for the integrity of the unit, for the integrity of the leader, to have that trust. You might not like me. You might not queue up on my, if you know about my politics or my religions or whatever, my hobbies, we might not connect. But if you can trust what I say and how I'm going to follow up, that trumps, in my mind, everything else. Let me go to that group here. I'm just going to randomly select Ron here, if you would, or Ron, do you have any thoughts or comments on this that you would share?
Yeah, I've actually been thinking about like two basic things. It may not just, I think it feeds to leadership and to ethics. One thing I learned the hard way is that I had to learn to be really good at listening. Just shut up and listen. You may know what you want to say, you may know the answer, but you first have to hear everything, because that is respectful of what somebody, because sometimes all they want to do is say what they need to say. Even if you're not going to be able to respond with what they want, you got to do that. And the second thing actually is, it goes back to something I learned from HR training regarding drug and alcohol abuse, is that always go back when you need, always go back to the job description, and look at what the job is and the thing that you're looking at, and speak to that, because that's objective. I think as it can, it takes the personality out of it, and it just speaks to okay, here's what you're supposed to do, and how is this working, and how do we make it work? But it goes back to that. So those are the things I have to offer.
Ron, the first thing you mentioned, the listening piece, in my mind, translates also into compassion. You're showing somebody the respect by hearing them out without interruption. I'm not always so good at that, but it's really compassion for the other individual. This last point you brought up is really interesting. It's not really come up too much this morning, but it seems to me where we can, I know sometimes we think we shouldn't have to do this, right? But we put things in writing. We use as much of that, we'll call it the law part of the work to say, this is, like you said, these are the three things your job defines. And so we can sort of measure, be as objective as we can about that. Thank you. Appreciate that, Ron. Marjorie, how about you? Thoughts on how to go about this?
When we're talking about strategies, one thing I think that I've kind of learned in recent years, and it's not really necessarily ethics, but it has to do with building trust, is that you probably can't over communicate. Like, I feel like we have a tendency to think that we're saying too much, but especially if you have faculty members that work for you, you know, they're teaching, you're doing your thing. You can go for like a week or two and not see them. And there's always a lot of, I don't know how it is at your schools, but here there's always a lot of stuff floating around in the air. Nobody is really sure what's going on. So I feel like if you feel like you're giving them enough information, give them just a little bit more than you think is enough. And I think that is I guess I'd say is a strategy that I think I've tried to use.
Could I also ask Marjorie if it's how critical it is to change modalities of that information?
Yes, and I guess along with that, I'd say that communicate it more. Everything can be communicated more than once.
Yeah.
I think there tends to be a tendency here to people say, "Well, we sent that out in an email." Well, I feel like I do read all of my emails pretty thoroughly. I know a lot of people don't. Everyone's busy, so if you sent it out like once, it probably needs to go at least 3 times.
Yeah.
Before they see it, and if you have the chance with alternate modalities, which isn't always possible if you don't see people in person, but yeah, that's I think that's I guess a corollary to that is many times multiple media.
Yeah. Thank you. Shinta, how about you? Thoughts on this conversation today?
I do have some thoughts. Thank you, Larry. And by the way, great session today. A lot of what everyone has talked about this morning truly resonated with what I experienced as well. So to your question, Larry, on strategies, one of the things that I've always had almost throughout my entire professional career time is mentors. And I think having mentors that you trust, having mentors who not just talk the talk, but walk the walk. And so you admire their leadership style and experience and skills and attitudes towards leadership. I ask my mentors to hold me accountable, to stay within the ethical framework. Because in doing so, I know that I'm always going to try my best to ensure that the things that I do when I communicate with my team or when I engage in whatever activities I need to do, that ethical framework is at the forefront of my mind. And then if I happen to do something that may have gone awry or didn't go as expected, I again ask my mentors, all right, well, what are your thoughts on what just happened here, and how should one go about, either fixing it or resolving it or moving forward? So having mentors who you trust and hold you accountable, I think can really help shape one's professional experience in leadership.
That's a great strategy. And as soon as you said that, I was like, dang, how did I miss that one? That's a really good one. And I can remember over my career having certain individuals. Sometimes they were a senior to me. Sometimes it was just a colleague, maybe at another institution or another unit within my own institution that I could share with and respect their input. So that's a great one. Julie Whetstone, can I call on you? Do you have a thought to share with us today?
Sure. I just want to say I've really been enjoying the conversation. I'm not in a formal leadership position right now, so it's not, I haven't had to deal with some of these situations personally, so it's always interesting to just learn from everyone and get so many different perspectives.
Good, thank you. My hope is, Julie, that you are on this call and perhaps on a path of leadership. Although we always say that you're a leader at any level, and so I appreciate your being here today. Thank you. Molly, any thoughts, reactions?
Hi there, folks. Good morning. I kind of in the same boat as Julie, where I'm not actually in a leadership position at the moment, but I'm definitely enjoying the conversation and thinking about some of the challenges in leadership. I also really like the idea, Shinta's idea of mentorship, and have appreciated even informal mentorships and just learning from other colleagues about how to run groups or be proactive and getting work done and moving the ball forward in many of the work situations when you've got contrasting ethical frameworks happening, which is often the case in education, I think. But yeah, thank you for the conversation. It's really been interesting.
Thank you, Molly. You reminded me of another idea, and this goes along with what Shinta said. Having an identified, I don't know, I'll call it a hero, a mentor here. You know, someone that you look at. I had a senior leader in my institution who I was fortunate enough to report to for quite a while, and I looked to him for his behavior. I was always analyzing what he did, watching him in meetings and how he responded to people. And there were times I might say, this person will go unnamed, but I kind of like turned my head a little sideways, like that was kind of an interesting decision. I was not privy to all of the background information that he had, but I always had trust that he was making an ethical decision. So the other thought, Molly, quickly that you stimulated was the role of MOLLI, MOLLI, if you will, the Leadership Institute, because one of the goals of MOLLI is to create this network of peers, a network of individuals that you can connect to, learn along with, and have somebody outside of your institution so, you know, I know Shinta now, and we went through MOLLI together, and now I have someone I can call up and say, boy, I got this really squirrely situation. I just share it with you. What do you think about this? And it's sometimes easier to have Shinta, who might know a little bit about my organization, but not everything, which is maybe good. And then she can provide the guidance and insight. I think that's really helpful. So thank you, Molly Ahern. Also, Molly. Ashley, let me go to you here in the final few minutes. Thoughts or reflections on today's conversation? I was thinking, now I drew the last one there. Ashley may have stepped away from the computer. I think it's one of these times we're going to get somebody who's not going to turn there. But hey, Julie Prosky, are you still with us by any chance?
Yes, yes, I am.
You're always such a great source of wisdom and thinking around this. I don't want to lose you and Doug. I'd like to get your insights as well. Do you have any thoughts on today's conversation?
Well, Larry, coincidentally, excuse me, I had just put something in the chat. If you open the chat and read I had a question for the group, and I realize it's very late right now and there may not be time to think about this, but it's something that I've always struggled with through my career.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, this is being the live with yourself when maybe the expectations of others might not be either comfortable with that or not agree with that. Have you?
Yeah, I think several
experienced this, I suspect.
Several of us in this group are managers, and so we have experienced what I call the managerial squeeze.
How was that resolved, Julie?
Well, I don't know that it has ever been resolved. So I'm curious to know if anybody has developed any mental or psychological stratagems to make yourself feel better.
Let's go to the guru on the top of the mountain, Doug Gray.
Well, let me say, as far as Julie's question, it is one that we could go into for a long time. But one of the things that we recommend in the MOLLI program is that you make sure that your values, your ethics are aligned with your institutional values and ethics.
Yeah.
And, you know, it is more important to be ethical when your boss, your institution is not aligning with what you want to have. It's extremely difficult, but it's extremely important. Sometimes you'll get, you know, the nickname, oh, the ethics person or something like that. But, you know, you have to live with yourself a long, long time. And, you know, the value of this one position, this one job doesn't, for me, add up to second guessing myself for the rest of my life. So that's what I would say.
Good. Thank you. Thank you. Hey, Joe, I skipped over you there. I didn't mean to do that. Do you have any thoughts or reflections on today's conversation?
Well, I was just thinking about that ideas of trust and respect, and I think it was Chandra that talked about authenticity. And like I challenge myself, and this actually builds off of Ron's comments, not just listening, but I challenge myself to move out of the center and give space for those folks to share their ideas so that I have something to listen to. But that's a difficult thing to do. It goes against my nature, but it's one thing that I try.
You know, Joe, that reminds me, the very first question I asked the whole group was to put a word into the chat there, and openness was listed twice. And I think what you're suggesting is a very interesting point of being open, right? Being not closing yourself into your belief systems or such. Again, always within the framework of ethic, always has to be ethical, but opening up for ideas and input that may be different than what you think.
Right. And, you know, if all that leads back to the ethics, there still has to be like a grounding in that. Moving out of the center doesn't necessarily leave room for that type of thing. So
yeah.
That's the hard part.
Yeah. Thank you.
But thank you.
All right. Good. Hey, this was terrific. I hope you got some ideas. I did as Doug and Julie and the team have talked when we were kind of building this. It's a big topic, and there are lots of different directions, and it's a little bit ethereal. You know, you're trying to grab onto something here, but I think thinking about it and developing strategies and practices is really essential for how we apply this concept of ethics to our workplace. So let me thank our panelists first, Ali, Colleen, and Chandra. Thank you so much for your time and energy today. And to the rest of the team, I'll call Ron and Molly and Ashley and Julie, everyone who's been with us today. Joe, thank you for joining in. That was a little bit unconventional of calling on you by name to give your thoughts, but you all responded so well, so thank you. Doug, do you want to sign off?
Yeah, I'd like to again thank Larry for his work as the facilitator for this session. The Maryland Online Leadership Institute will be holding its next face-to-face residential program this June. So take a look at our website if you're interested. And I really appreciate the time that everyone has given for this. And we hope to see you in another webinar or face-to-face event. Thank you.
Thank you all. Have a good day. Bye-bye.